and welcome to episode 3 of The Smallest Thing. I'm Lisa Manterfield. I hope you're staying safe and sane. Have you experienced your quarantine wobble yet? Well, we'll talk about that after the episode, plus some unexpected but much needed advice I got from my mum. But first, in this week's episode, Em attends the funeral for Dr. Spencer, and people in the village are getting worried. Welcome to the serialized audiobook, The Smallest Thing, written by Lisa Manterfield, read for you by Charlie Sanderson.
Chapter 3. Sunday, July the 24th. On the morning of my third funeral in as many weeks, a crowd gathers outside our small stone church, filling the forecourt and spilling out through the lich gate and into the street. The mood is quiet and respectful, but underneath is an air of worry. I don't know anyone who didn't like Dr. Spencer. There was nothing to dislike about him. And ordinarily, almost everyone in Eam would turn out to pay their respects. But this flu thing has people in a flap, and almost half have stayed away. Dad has no such qualms. He immediately steps through the gate and circulates among our neighbours, shaking hands and offering supportive words. I hold back, staying out of his way. Since I handed in my notice last week, he's been more distant than ever. "Why in God's name would you want to move there?" was his first response, before he remembered he was supposed to put his foot down and forbid me. Mum didn't seem surprised by my news or Dad's response when I rang to tell her. "He'll live," she said, confirming my fear that he had hung all his hopes on my staying, not just to keep me close to home, but to set me on a track that follows in his footsteps. His plans couldn't have been any further from mine if he'd decided to send me on a homemade rocket ship to Mars. I've not mentioned Rosepart to either of them. Why rock an already unstable boat? Finally, I spot Deb trailing alongside her family. As usual, she's dressed head to toe in black. For once, she blends in with everyone else. Except for one small detail. "Hiya, Salty," she says, her voice muffled inside the blue surgical mask covering her face. "What's the disguise in aid of?" I ask. Deb indicates with a twitch of her head that we should move out of earshot to talk. For a horrible moment, I think she's going to tell me she's got the flu, and I hurry after her to hear her news. "Helena's freaking out," Deb says, referring to her stepmother by first name, as she always does. "About what? Are you okay?" "Fine," Deb sighs, as if the explanation is too wearisome. "We went to this exhibition of medieval medicine in Manchester yesterday. Really fascinating, but now she's all wigged out about epidemics." Deb reaches into her pocket and hands me a small plastic bottle. I glance down at the label. Hand sanitizer. If we weren't at a funeral, I'd laugh from relief. "I certainly appreciate modern medicine and the importance of basic sanitation," she says, squeezing a blob of clear gel into my hands. "But Helena has gone seriously off the deep end. She's talking about sending Tom and me to our grandparents." "What?" I say. "She can't do that." "I know, I'd rather die from the flu than boredom. And Mum's off in Russia again, building pipelines to China, so we can't stay with her. But don't worry, I'll work my magic and talk Helena out of it. That said, I wouldn't shake too many hands if I were you. Don't want you spending your last days here in bed." "I wish," I say, my mind flitting to Roe. Since I gave Dad my notice, I swear he's tried to wring every last minute of work out of me before I leave. I've barely had a chance to be with Roe. Deb is about to say more when a line of black cars pulls up in front of the church. We sober instantly, pressing against the chilly stone wall and bowing our heads as Louise is helped out of the car by her family. I wait for a team of pallbearers to lift Dr. Spencer's coffin from the hearse, but instead a lone man in a frock coat and top hat carries a small wooden chest through the lich gate, up the stone path and into the church. "Bloody Nora, Is that him? I whisper to Deb. She nods. They cremated him. Coroner's orders. Why? I hiss, as the congregation funnels into the church in silence. The post-mortem was inconclusive, she says. So they don't even know if it was the flu? Right, she says. So why the mask? Well, Deb lowers her voice to a whisper. Something killed him, and until we know what, Helena thinks it's wise to be cautious. At the door of the church, I hesitate, glancing around at all the bodies in this enclosed space. Deb and her family aren't the only ones being cautious. In the back rows and around the edges of the congregation, small pods of massed people huddle away from the others, leaving gaps like missing teeth in the normally orderly rows of pews. Beneath the subdued murmur of voices, the tension is palpable, causing the hairs on the backs of my hands to prickle. Perhaps Helena isn't overreacting at all. I fumble for a tissue in my pocket and press it over my mouth and nose, pretending to stifle my grief. Taking a quick glance around the congregation, I'm surprised to see Rose sitting with his parents and older brothers, 6 black-haired Tories, in a pew by themselves. That they came all the way into Eam from their farm says a lot about the impact of Dr. Spencer's death. I'm not surprised to see that none of them wears a mask. Like me, Roe comes from a long line of locals, and people around here are made of tough stuff. Among the masked people, I recognise Mrs. Glover, the world's biggest hypochondriac, and Millie Talbot's family, who never mingle because they think they're better than the rest of us. And Deb will be the first to admit that Helena tends to err on the overprotective side with her stepchildren. None of these people are good judges of danger. And if our bug were anything more serious than the flu, we'd have heard about it by now. I wish I could sit by Roe, feel the comfort of his arm around me and his body pressed close. Soon, I think. I shoot him a quick, seductive look from behind my tissue, checking to make sure no one else has seen, and hurry to the front of the church where Dad has secured a pew for us, right behind Louise. He clearly isn't worried about a bout of summer flu. The Reverend Momperson gives what the old folks will later refer to as a nice service. He talks about Dr. Spencer's place in the community, his service to its residents, and how he always had a kind word and a smile for everyone. He reminds us all, as if we could forget, that life is short. He acknowledges Louise and their families and asks them to find strength now that the doctor has been called back to God's side. It's an odd phrase, and I drift away for a moment, visualising God looking down on his flock and realising he hasn't had a good chat with Dr. Spencer for a while. I think I'll call him back, thinks God. And the next minute the doctor is struck down with the flu and transported up to God's couch, all because the Almighty was lonely. I don't mean to be sacrilegious, but I hate the randomness of death. I hate that a person who wasn't even that old could suddenly be gone. I try to imagine not being here anymore. I can't picture what it would feel like to be dead. That's stupid. It wouldn't feel like anything, of course. But when I try to imagine me, Emma, suddenly no longer existing, I just can't get my head around it. From nowhere, a knot of emotion forms in my chest, making it hard to breathe. I don't know what this is. I've been sad about Dr. Spencer's death, of course, but this fresh grief is unexpected. It's like the sadness over losing Dr. Spencer has magnetised every bit of sadness and fear I've ever felt, drawing them close until they've collected inside me as an enormous clump of loss. I had no idea I'd be so affected. Dad glares at me sideways, and I blink away my tears before he can see them. I wait for him to put his arm around me, like Mum would, or give my shoulder a squeeze, or pass me a hanky. I can almost feel him deciding which to do, and I will him to do something. But when I look up at him again, his eyes are focused squarely on the altar. I suck back my tears, pulling my sadness inside, where I know it will be safe. The vicar keeps the service short, and everyone seems grateful. But as he wraps up his eulogy to Dr. Spencer, he asks that we keep those not present in our thoughts. I think he's talking about our own dearly departed, But then he mentions Andy Hawksworth, with whom Dad sometimes plays darts, and who was most definitely alive and well a week ago. Only now he isn't well enough to pay his respects today. And the Wainwrights, who've stayed at home with their 2 sick boys? Then he breaks the news that Karen Cooper passed away this morning after a short illness. A ripple of shock makes its way around the congregation. I pivot to find Deb and gauge her reaction, but she's not there anymore. As we file out of the church, Dad's face is grim. "Dad," I whisper, "this isn't good." He looks at me as if I've just said the most moronic thing ever. "No," he says. "In fact, I'd say that for the Coopers, it's absolutely tragic." Deb's parents are really worried, I say, telling him about their plans to send Deb away. "Do you think we should leave?" "Leave?" Dad stops so abruptly that we almost cause a pile-up with the people behind us. "And go where exactly?" "I don't know. Auntie Margie's with Mum and Alice." Dad shakes his head, and I think he's going to say something sarcastic about me leaving soon anyway, but instead he fixes me with a look that makes me feel about an inch tall. "If ever there was a time for us to all stick together, it's now. Yes, we need to try our best not to catch this flu, but you can't just run away whenever things get difficult, Emmett, especially when people need you." And with that, he strides away, leaving me at the exact moment I need him most. Slowly, the mourners disperse, heading to Louisa's for strong tea and slices of pork pie. Deb and her family have already gone home, hopefully not to pack their suitcases. Standing in the church forecourt, I have no idea what to do next. I don't want to go to Louisa's and be around all this sadness and worry anymore, especially now I know this flu is going around fast, and I definitely don't want to be around my dad and his pathetic lectures. But I don't want to be alone either. I step off the path into the freshly mown grass and scuff my way toward the part of the churchyard where the newer granite and marble headstones sit. My great-grandparents are buried here, along with Dad's dad, who died before I was born, and Grandma Siddle, whom we lost a couple of years ago. Next to my grandparents is a small white stone, a memorial, not a grave. The grass is trimmed neatly all around it, and the stone washed clean so the inscription can be clearly read. Sandra Ellen Siddle is part of the reason Dad is so opposed to my leaving. Years ago, before I was born, even before my parents met, Dad's younger sister, my wild Auntie Sandra, went off backpacking around Europe and never came back. He doesn't talk about it much, doesn't talk about it at all actually. But Mum told me once, after I pressed her for the story, that a fellow backpacker, part of a group Auntie Sandra had met up with, had been charged with her disappearance. Nothing was ever proved. He was later released and the mystery was forgotten, but not by Dad. The short leash on which he tries to keep me is thanks to a woman I never even met. It's another reminder that death isn't selective, that neither youth innocence nor good behaviour will buy you a free pass. The thought gives me little comfort. Just then, I spot Roe breaking away from the crowd and making his way to the bottom end of the churchyard. He waves, inviting me to follow. His long, lean figure ambles over the crest of the hill and drops out of sight. I know what I'm supposed to do. I should go to Louisa's, offer my condolences, share my sadness with my friends and neighbours. But the tug of my other life pulls at me again. "Life is short" is no longer just an expression for Dr. Spencer, and I'm painfully aware that I can no longer fritter my short life away on other people's expectations. I need to go where I am wanted, and I need to get the hell out of this village before I become generation number 11 of the dead Siddles. Turning away from the village, no longer caring who sees me, I brush through the damp grass and pick my way through the headstones to where Roe and my future are waiting.
Welcome back. If you've been on lockdown for any length of time now, odds are you've experienced a quarantine wobble. You know how it goes. You're sitting there in your PJs, minding your own business, when suddenly this wall of emotions comes hurtling at you. Your personal set of wobble emotions may vary, but they probably include some combination of frustration, anger, sadness, fear, anxiety, loneliness, feeling trapped and suffocated, worrying about loved ones, worrying about yourself, uncertain of what the future will bring, uncertain if the future will come at all. Maybe you've settled into working or studying or parenting or caregiving at home, but when the wobble happens, the wheels come off. I had my own personal wobble earlier this week. I felt untethered, unmotivated to focus on anything when nothing in my future seemed certain. What's the point of doing anything but sleeping? I was sick of the sight of the four walls of my office, sick of walking and running around the same streets in my neighbourhood, sick of not seeing friends, sick of not being able to make plans for anything. I completely lost the plot. I called my mum in the UK, not to vent, but to check in on her and make sure she's okay. My mum is 87, she lives alone, is fiercely independent and hates being stuck indoors. My brothers and I check in on her often just to chat, and my sister-in-law drops off groceries every week, so my mum is doing okay. But I worry about her being lonely, so I called. I couldn't keep my wobble to myself, though, and before I knew it, I was, in fact, venting to my mum about how sick I am of being stuck. She listened, and then she said, "Well, we just have to get through it." Coming from anyone else, this would have felt like a brush off. But my mom has lived through things. She grew up during a world war, and I don't just mean she was alive while a war was going on the other side of the world. As a girl, she lived in a city that was bombed. She knows what it's like to be on lockdown every night, wondering if it could be your last. To fear for your life because your life is truly in danger. To see no future, to be rationed, to have your movements restricted, to be hungry, to have no school. So when my mom says, "You just have to get through it," she speaks from experience. And it turns out that's just what I needed to hear. "We just have to get through it" acknowledges that life isn't a bowl of cherries right now. It says it's okay to feel scared, helpless, frustrated, or just plain mad at the world. And it says that there is a future. There is another side to this. We don't know yet what we'll find there, but if we just get through it, we'll find out. So this week I leave you with the wisdom of Mum. We can get through this. Join me next week as M's situation gets serious. This is one of my favourite chapters in the book and the one I always read at events, so I hope you'll join me. Until then, be well. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Smallest Thing. To make sure you don't miss next week's episode, you can subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and more. If you'd like to support the show, please leave a review and share this series with others you think might enjoy it. If you're on Instagram, tag me there at LisaManterfield_, or follow me on Facebook at author Lisa Manterfield and Twitter at Lisa Manterfield. My newsletter subscribers are always the first to know about my news, events, upcoming releases, giveaways, and more. Sign up for monthly delivery at lisamanterfield.com/subscribe and get your complimentary copy of Love, Loss and Letting Go, 3 of my short stories. Thanks to Justin Joseph for producing and editing this show, and to Ketsa.uk for the music. That's all for this episode. Thanks for listening.